Tonight's story was made using an improvisational story-building method designed to help collaborators progress quickly from a concept to a complete first draft. Basically, within the space of 4 hours, two friends generated a 3,000-word story with 30 illustration sketches. The entire creative process took place in real time on a public forum. You can visit the link below to view the original. Now, here's the story, dramatized and unedited. Norm and Criblock Follow the Cat. Written and read by Jeremy Loomis. Cover image by featured illustrator Jason Shaben. Norm lived way the heck out there, in the middle of the woods, where the deer and the mythical creatures made their rounds in harmony and ecology. He and his brother were many miles apart. Norm's baby brother, Criblock, lived in the big city. Everything was fine between Mom and Dad. It's just, well, it's classified. Yes, it's because of the government that these boys were not able to be in one another's daily life. But Norm wanted to be there in Criblock's life, in whatever limited capacity he could manage. He just didn't know how that could work. Because apart from his running shoes, which were very fast, he had no sure transportation to get himself from the wooded, hilly country out to the big city. At this same time, Criblock had some family considerations on his little baby mind as well. Alas, for the most part, those remain classified, and the bits that aren't classified don't make a shred of sense without the bits that are. So his mind must remain a mystery to you, at least for now. What he was doing, though, on the public record, was smelling flowers, sometimes from several feet away. Criblock liked the scent of flowers, but he didn't like to get right up on them. To him it was like when the Yankee Candle employee opens the candle jar and hands you the lid to smell, rather than the candle directly. He just found that a little bit of distance suited him in his relationship with flowers. So on this day, and at this time, Criblock stood on the sidewalk among the morning commuters, and from several feet away, he sniffed the ever-loving crap out of a daisy. And the truth is, he sniffed it so hard that the daisy had to really work to stay rooted. Fortunately, the daisy's mother, which isn't exactly the way that daisies work, had taught this daisy to stand its ground, if you will. To hold its own, if you will. The daisy does not play a vital role. After this exercise, Criblock coughed to get the smell and the petals out of his nose, and he said,
"My brother has never seen the city. He hasn't even seen me since I learned to speak. It's about time, I think."
And because he knew that the nature of his mother's work could not easily accommodate a spontaneous trip to the hilly country, Criblock tried to think of other ways by which he might be able to close the gap between his brother and himself. While Criblock was thinking, his big brother was smoking a ham. But that was boring and took a while, so I'll tell you what happened after he ate. After Norm ate his ham, he lay on the side of his favorite clover hill and took in the view of the sky. Today's sky was of a rare bright blue, and as he was trying to remember when, if ever, he had seen so deep a blue before, Norm heard a scratching and a guttural utterance very close by. He turned his head to look directly into the creature's eyes.
"Oh, hello, Marmalello,"
Norm said.
"No,"
replied his stylish Yeti friend. Norm chuckled and shook his head, always baffled by Marmalello's important mix of wit and wisdom. Marm put on his glasses and looked up at a cloud.
"Well, I tell you, Marmo,"
said Norm.
"I tell you,
Marm rested his hands behind his head.
I gotta get to my brother,"
Norm said. Marmalello pointed to a lovely white cloud with conviction, and Norm knew from experience that he'd better pay mind. He saw nothing besides the cloud at first. But he became gradually certain that the cloud he saw was changing shape in a way that clouds do not do. And then he thought the cloud was getting bigger, but then he changed his mind and thought that a very broad bubble was descending to the earth from out of the cloud. But then he changed his mind again, as the huge whatever it was grew close. It did look a lot like a cloud, though it also looked a bit like a giant sock on an invisible giant's giant foot. And as it fell on him, and he found himself suspended within it, it felt like, crap. It felt like water must feel when it doesn't mind being in a sponge. Norm turned his head just in time to see Marm give the sort of thumbs up that said, "I called in a favor." And then we're going to call it a water sock, began to tumble down the hill, end over end, with Norm inside it. At this moment, Criblock was taking his pet for a walk, because it was overdue for one. Criblock's pet was a special mix, a crossbreed of a lobster and a border collie plush toy. It was real, but nobody knew how, and many had very legitimate doubt that they would ever find out how by the end of the story. Anyway, Criblock was on a walk with Shillelagh, which had taken the vet's office 7 reminders to finally spell correctly on the unfortunate animal's documentation, and the whole time he found himself taking special note of all the wonderful sights that he wished he could show his big brother. Shillelagh was walking him pretty hard. Good boy. Boy? Good creature. And this went on for plenty long enough, until Criblock said, "My dogs are tired," and tethered Shillelagh to a lamppost, and ordered a hot dog with mustard and sauerkraut real quick. Oh, the noise that you would imagine Shillelagh to have made! But no, he or she was an excellently behaved animal. I'm going to go with she. And although Shillelagh begged for a taste all the way up until Criblock ate the last of it on a park bench, she was none the less quiet, and didn't even try to jump on Criblock when he loosed her from the post. And as they made their merry way to admire the rock formation in the park, Criblock said to Shillelagh, "What?" because he saw something in the distant sky, above the tree line. And in a moment, this material apparition had closed a remarkable distance, and he worried, because he saw his brother inside, and it was now hurtling toward the rock formation with his brother inside. Criblock looked at Shillelagh, and Shillelagh looked at Criblock. And Norm went straight right slam down on the rock formation, into which the water sock seemed to disappear or dematerialize. You can pick which one of those words you would like to remember as having gone that way. And to Criblock's sudden and massive relief, which could be smelled from some distance as well, Norm stood to his feet, having only hurt his nose a little. "I'd still prefer that to a cab," quipped baby Criblock, and Norm hugged his big baby head. "Now what do you want to do?" Criblock asked, trying to gauge how exhausted his country boy brother was from flying in. Norm patted Shillelagh on the head, and Shillelagh peed on his shoe.
"Well, I didn't come here to sleep,"
Norm said.
"I came here to be with my baby brother."
"Then let me take you everywhere,"
said Criblock. And so he did. And when they'd been just about everywhere, and there was nearly nowhere they'd not already been, Criblock stopped walking, and he said,
"Oh, shoot, I didn't take you to my favorite."
And he took him to the alley entrance of a nightclub called the Alley Cat. And all the while, Norm had a feeling in his gut, like he and his brother did not need to be in a place like this. And as Norm took note that they were the only ones here, he asked his tender baby brother,
"Why is this place your favorite?"
"Well,"
Criblock said,
"I've never been here when they're actually open, so I can't speak to the nature of the establishment. but I'm friends with the manager, and she always gives me a free glass of chocolate milk whenever I stop in before hours.
Oh, so that's why,
Norm said as they approached the bar. Then Criblock gave Norm a mischievous look, like little brothers do, and he pointed to the real reason why this place was his favorite. It was behind and above the bar, and it was bigger than the water sock had been. And as with the water sock, Norm did not immediately know what to make of what he saw, for it was a giant and furry ball for the most part. But then the shape began to change, and as it stretched out to its full length, Norm recognized it to be a cat in a cage. And yet it was no normal cat, but a cat several times larger than a brown bear. And several browns browner! Norm swallowed a lump in his throat as he accidentally made contact with the great beast's glowing yellow eyes.
so you like coming here to look at the cat, little brother?
Yes, usually, said Criblock, but today I'm going to let it out.
And before Norm could utter in slow motion the words,
I'm not so sure that's such a great idea,
Criblock had gotten up behind the bar, served himself a pint of chocolate milk, draft chocolate milk, and somehow unlocked the cage, leaving its tall door swinging wide open. The cat crawled out of the cage and crossed the ceiling with its clingy padded paws, and it escaped by the alleyway door. Criblock looked at Norm with an expression that only babies can make. A face that said, "What have I done? And can you bail me out?" By the time they got back out onto the street, the mayhem was evident. There were taxis on top of street lights, pigeons coughing up horse feathers, tourists spilling Starbucks all over chalk art. It was the worst thing that Norm had ever seen, and he had one time seen a cow give birth.
Let's find the cat,
Criblock said.
Let's find an end to the madness.
Norm responded. They ran until Shillelagh was too tired to go any further, and then Norm scooped her into his arms, and then ran until Criblock got fussy, and then Norm scooped him into his arms as well. And he ran past skyscrapers, past off-duty saxophone players, past hydrants, vagrants, and tyrants, past flats with people who had their own Wi-Fi passwords. And then they came to the river. A ferry was passing by, and upon it a cat of magnificent proportion was raining down terror. It was thudding its great padded paws over and over, going around in a circle. Neither of them knew why, but it seemed both to Norman and to Criblock that this was leading up to something. But as the cat walked around in its devious circles, nothing came to mind. Nothing came to mind to halt it in its tracks. Oh, the people that ran around and got knocked over and went over the side and had to swim to the shore. But there was nothing for it. And then came the helicopter, and a very familiar voice came from within it.
"Oh my goodness, sons,"
said Norm and Criblock's dad.
I forgot you had a helicopter, Dad.
Said Norm.
We could have come here together. Sorry.
I gotta figure out what we're gonna do about this one.
Said the boy's father.
"You did this, Criblock? Huh? This is because of you?"
Dad said over the bullhorn as he regarded the large cat. And from his brother's embrace, Criblock waved at his father, beaming at the recognition. Then the boys saw a ladder drop and swing from the helicopter, and above the cat their father began to climb down with something in his hand.
Is that a stun gun?
Criblock asked as he began to suck his thumb.
Is it?
Norm replied. And just as Norm thought to wonder who was piloting the helicopter, another familiar voice met his ears. His mother had come up behind them, with men in black suits and a secret-looking contraption. It looked like a titanium teeter-totter, with blinking lights, and probably a motor inside. 2 large men came from behind Mom, and they set up the machine. One held a heavy ball. It looked like a cat's eye marble, but larger than a bowling ball.
What are you gonna do with that?
Norm asked his dear and elusive mother.
I'm going to have Jimmy load this onto one end, and I'm going to have Jimmy's name and fire it. And basically, we're going to fire this cat's eye into the cat's eye.
Oh,
Norm answered, but just in the worst time possible, Shillelagh had a dream about herding clams, and one of her pincers got Norm real good, right on his Criblock holding arm. So what do you know, Norm dropped his baby brother like a, I wasn't going to say it, but like a total rube. And the arguably bigger problem was that Jason had an itchy trigger finger. So Norm found himself once again separated from his baby brother by a sudden and considerable distance. The end. Just kidding. Criblock hurtled through the air as his loving father aimed his own little contraption at the massive cat and tried to make it go. And the passers-by were congregating, and many of them were murmuring about cruelty to animals, and some were anxious about it being a stun gun. But then Norm recognized its color and exclaimed,
oh, Dad, that's my electric razor. You brought it from home.
And that calmed some people down, even though there was a freaking huge cat on top of a ferry. Well, Dad figured it out in time to drop the razor, which freed his arm to catch his bouncing baby boy. But Criblock was coming at him with such trajectory that when Dad caught him, the latter spun around and they both fell, with the cat looking playfully up at them. Norm and Mom both screamed as the cat clapped Dad and Criblock in its paws and flung them back into the air. It repeated this once, twice, 3 times, elated to have a plaything. And then the cat caught them up in its mouth, and everybody on land held their breath until they puked. Norm held his mother's hand, and the cat crouched and wiggled its back end and took a fantastic leap back to the land. When the cat appeared before them, nobody knew what to try next. Then Norm looked up and saw that his dad and his brother were still okay. And then he heard a like a mighty rushing wind. The cat looked nervous.
Oh,
Norm shouted.
I've seen this before. It knows how to catch critters, but it never learned what to do with them. I don't think it's gonna eat them.
But how do we get them out of the cat's mouth? Asked Norm answered pensively. And then the sound of propellers drew near, and the flowers danced like in a mosh pit as the helicopter landed in the park.
Mom,
Mom called out sharply.
you're going to stay in there if you know it's good for you and this family.
The old rascal called back.
He's right,
Mom said, and threw up her hands. Threw up in her hands. No, that was right the first time. And then, to the somehow greater shock of the city folk, Marmalello the Yeti emerged from the helicopter with his swagger like you know he has, and the cameras started flashing, and the cat hissed, yet the more nervously, and the Yeti said, loud enough that you could hear it indoors, even with the shower and the radio on, and the cat released the hostages along with a thick line of drool, and suddenly appeared not to quite know where it was or what it was doing there. And Marmalello pressed a button on his shades, which activated a glowing red laser pointer. And with that, Marmalello led the cat on a playful laser chase throughout the park, and up the streets, and down the back roads, and back to the hilly country, where classified creatures can get by peaceably.
You know the Bureau will never stand for this,
said to Mom, and June agreed. You really let the cat out of the bag. Mom was devastated. Even though her family was safe, she knew that her career was over.
You had one job,
muttered June.
I had two,
she whispered.
The cat and the Yeti were my secrets.
Is it so bad,
Dad asked,
to live life without secrets? I miss you, you know.
And that made Mom cry. And then a horse-drawn carriage ran over Shillelagh, and that made Criblock cry. And then Norm's razor got caught on a nose hair, which stung and made him bleed a bit, and that made Norm cry. Even Jason cried a little bit, and nothing can make Dad cry. And then nothing happened, and that made Dad cry. And everybody gathered in a circle and hugged and messed up each other's hair. And Dad said,
Who cares anyway? We can live off the land together like before.
And Mom kind of felt like Dad still didn't see how to understand or value her ambitions, but also she loved him and saw where the sentiment was coming from, and she was like, you know what, yeah. And before the long helicopter ride home, they stopped into a nice department store in the city, and Mom purchased a bunk bed for the kids, and Dad fastened the bed to the ladder, and for the first time, Norm and Criblock slept on their very own bunk beds, like normal brothers do on a long helicopter ride back home. The end. Sweet dreams, everyone.